Fantastic. So thank you very much, Susan. And as Susan mentioned, I'm Daisy Cunningham. I am the current head of heritage of the college. And yes, Ian has retired. He only retired 2 weeks ago, so we haven't given him much of a breather. But he was the previous head of heritage, and so he knows far more than I do about our books, and specifically about our botanical books. So just before we kind of get into the detail of the talk, I just wanted to very briefly touch on who we are and you know why we're here, not in a particularly philosophical way, but we are part of the Royal College of Physicians of Edinburgh, which has existed since 1681. We have, since our foundation, been concerned with examinations, education, and training of doctors. That's what we did in 1681. That's still what we do now. Obviously, the technology, the setup is slightly different, but we still provide the same resources that we did. We are a charity, so we don't receive any money from the government. We are entirely self-sufficient in providing these services. And what we are going to talk about today is, as Susan mentioned, physicians' flowers, which not entirely coincidentally, again, as Susan mentioned, is the exhibition which is currently running at the college. It's on until the 8th of April. It's a free public exhibition about the history of botany and medicinal plants. And for those of you who aren't able to visit in person but want to find out more at the end of this talk, there are various blogs, articles, videos and things on our website. So you can find out more online if you can't actually come in person. So I'm going to start with Physic Gardens, and particularly with Edinburgh's Physic Gardens. So why Edinburgh? It's not just because that's literally where I am right now and that's where the college is based. Edinburgh has a very rich botanical and history of physic. It is really when Physic Gardens became at the height of their importance, at the height of their relevance in the 1600s and 1700s. Edinburgh was one of the main scientific centers in the world, alongside Paris and Leiden. So there was a lot happening in Edinburgh. At that time, there were 2 universities in England and 5 universities in Scotland. So there's a lot happening. Here's an example. This is Edinburgh University. You can see on the screen here. So there's a huge amount happening in Edinburgh at this time. A lot of research, a lot of study, a lot of academics, you know, doing all sorts of interesting work. So there's a lot happening at this time. And this time, of course, is the height of the Scottish Enlightenment. So there's a lot of really interesting work being done, including by physicians. So on the left here in this image, you can see James Lind, who is credited as developing the world's first controlled clinical trial in his research on the causes of scurvy. It's Daniel Rutherford in the middle here, who isolated nitrogen. And I've forgotten the name of the gentleman on the right. It's Black. Joseph Black on the right here, who's research into carbon dioxide. So there's all these really important people doing this really kind of world-changing research, and it shows the line between physicians and other branches of science is very blurred at this time. You know, you're not either a chemist or a physician. You can be all of those things simultaneously. And unlike most universities where education is focused pretty much entirely on book learning at this time, so particularly Oxford and Cambridge, there's a lot of memorizing and regurgitating, you know, ancient Greek and Roman texts. In Edinburgh, they're very focused on original research and students really kind of getting their hands dirty, you know, getting into actually kind of seeing things up close. So that includes visits by the students to Edinburgh Infirmary, where they are actually meeting and treating patients as they are studying, but also visits to Physic Gardens, where they are researching materia medica, or the materials of medicine, which is one of the key subjects that they have to study while they are students. This is just to show, it is a little bit all over the place. Edinburgh has had a lot of Physic Gardens. For various reasons, sometimes floods, sometimes Jacobite rebellions, they have moved around. So I just thought I'd show just the number. It's all the dots with the green dots with the flowers on are where there were Physic Gardens in Edinburgh. So It is a lot, but the reason it's a lot is because Physic Gardens were so important to Edinburgh and so important to doctors' work. I will not be quizzing anybody at the end of it, so if you can't keep track of all the different names, that's absolutely fine. I have hopefully helpfully drawn a red circle, a red squiggle perhaps, round the first place that I'm going to talk about. So the first Physic Garden in Edinburgh, which is at the College of Surgeons. So not physicians where I am, but at surgeons. And that's in the 1650s, the first known Physic Garden. There may have been earlier ones that we just don't know about. But that's the first known Physic Garden in Edinburgh. And surgeons are obviously quite different from physicians in various ways. They're particularly interested in anatomy, in invasive procedures, and they weren't necessarily interested in growing the sorts of plants that physicians needed in order to treat their patients, in order to kind of carry out the sort of research that they were doing. So fairly quickly after the first one is set up, another one is set up. About 15 years later, our college, the College of Physicians, sets up our own Physic Garden at Holyrood. So this is obviously Holyrood here, the Royal Residence in Scotland. And this is the second Physic Garden that's set up by the founder of our college, Robert Sibbald, and another physician, Andrew Balfour. And this one is on a larger scale than the surgeons one, but it also has some important other elements to it. So James Sutherland, who was the self-taught gardener who ran this Physic Garden, not only sort of looked after the plants, but he researched them. He also taught on them. He started teaching medical students on the botanical uses. But he also developed this huge international network of correspondents who sent him plants from all over the world and helped him with his research. So it was the start of really studying plants in Edinburgh, as well as, you know, growing and using them. Here is Sibbald. This is, as I said, one of the founders of the college. This is Sutherland's book that I mentioned. So this is part of the research that he was doing on these plants that he was growing, was actually to write this catalogue, which has a lot of detail, not just, you know, a list of plants, but also information about how they can be used and where they were sourced from. Sutherland, you know, really did, as I say, kind of sort of start from nothing as a self-taught man, but he definitely worked his way up. He was made the King's botanist, and under a royal warrant, he was made the first professor of botany at Edinburgh University. So it really established the credentials of what he was trying to do. And he taught many generations of medical students. Quite a few plants were named after Sutherland, you know, out of respect for him by his sort of past students, including a few medical ones, such as the cancer bush from South Africa, which is named Sutherlandia. So it was sort of a real recognition that his students really appreciated and respected the work that he was doing down at Holyrood. This is for those who are able to visit Edinburgh at any point. The Physic Garden that was there, that I've just been talking about, was recreated by the Holyrood Palace. It opened in 2020, so admittedly in the middle of a pandemic, so it may not have had many visitors to date, but hopefully more in the future. So you can go and see a medicinal herb garden down near Holyrood. It's completely open to the public and there's no charge to visit it. So if you're there, you can stop by and have a look and get a bit of a feel for these historical Physic Gardens recreated in the modern day. But really, there wasn't a huge amount of space down at Holyrood. And although the garden was very successful, it was almost too successful because they ran out of space for the number of plants that Sutherland was planting and wanted to grow and wanted to use for his work. So another Physic Garden was set up, which was in what is now Waverley Station. It was Trinity Hospital, but is on that site. You can see in the image here the plaque which commemorates this Physic Garden. So this one at Waverley Station was set up by the same people, or the same person, Andrew Balfour, that set up Holyrood. So they weren't in competition with each other. They weren't any sort of going down separate routes. They worked together and they kind of pooled resources and shared plants. It really was just essentially an extension to Holyrood because they needed that bit more space. And this garden is also described by Sutherland in the book I mentioned before, and he describes how there were 2,000 plants in this Physic Garden. But as I say, it's now a platform at Waverley Station. So you can have a look at the plaque, but it's not quite as impressive as actually visiting a Physic Garden in the flesh. But yet more problems, like I mentioned before. There was flooding on this site. It's right by what is now Princess Street Gardens, but what was then a loch, a very unpleasant loch, which a lot of sewage was dumped in. So there was a problem with flooding at Trinity, but there was also a problem of being so close to Edinburgh Castle because of the Jacobite Rising and the siege of the castle. So it wasn't really a long-term solution, and they had to move yet again, and this time to Leith Walk, which you can see is sort of the main street running down on this map. For those who might not know, just in case there is anybody who doesn't know Edinburgh that well, Leith Walk used to be, at this point, was the road that connected the city of Edinburgh to the port town of Leith. The expansion of Edinburgh over the years means that Edinburgh has now sort of enveloped Leith, and it is now considered to be a suburb, but it was then a completely separate place. And so this Physic Garden that was sort of partway down Leith Walk was sort of between the two places, essentially. And this was quite a big undertaking, this Physic Garden, because not only did they have to develop 5 acres of land, but they had to take all the plants from Holyrood and Trinity to here. So this was the end of the last 2 Physic Gardens, and all those plants were brought here and developed on this site. And many eminent botanists studied at this Leith Walk Physic Garden. So they include the founder of London's Linnaean Society and the founders of the Royal Horticultural Society studied here on Leith Walk. And of course, there's very celebrated later medical students at Edinburgh, including Arthur Conan Doyle, Charles Darwin, and Richard Owen, who was the founder of the Natural History Museum in London. So there's an illustrious history sort of embedded there. But it turns out, once again, it's not as much space as they needed or they hoped for. So, and this is the last time, this is the last one of the many moves of the Physic Garden. Oh, sorry, I should have said, this is the gardener of the Physic Garden, John Hope, who was also a professor of botany at Edinburgh University. So again, was teaching at the university as well as caring for the garden. He's the gentleman on the right here, hard at work. But the last move of the Physic Garden was to Inverleith, an area of Edinburgh. It still sits there today as the Royal Botanic Gardens of Edinburgh. So the Botanic Gardens of Edinburgh has this very long history, and there is continuity to it. There are literally, you know, plants that were moved from Holyrood to Leith Walk to what is now Inverleith. So it is, it's not just in name, it really has been transferred all these times over the years. I thought I'd just show here a contemporary image from when the Inverleith Royal Botanics was set up, which was early 1800s, around 1810. And then on the right, the same glass house looking very much the same or similar to what it was at its foundation. So of course the Botanics is much bigger, you know, than it had been before, but than anywhere else available. So there's 270,000 plants there now. They have 3 other sites outside Edinburgh, which is Benmore, Logan, and Daywick. So it is a very large and expansive place. And I think what's very interesting or important about it is that it continues to be a research institution. So unlike some other botanic gardens, such as the one in Glasgow, which are primarily for public access, this is obviously a public space, which is free, is open to everyone, but there's a huge research division behind it, which is looking at the medical uses of these plants and the other uses of these plants, which traces back again to these very early days of establishing these places, not just for their beauty, but for their usefulness. And just a last comment in terms of the Botanic Gardens in Edinburgh. When the Leith Gardens were set up, They also built a lovely gardener's cottage, which you can see in this image here. And this was used for the gardener to stay in. It was used for research, but it was also used for medical teaching. And when the Physic Garden moved to Inverleith Row, this building was left behind and it was rented out to various people. It was sort of, and then eventually it sat derelict for a long time and it caught fire and it was ruins. And then in 2008, which is almost 200 years after the gardens had originally moved, they took apart the cottage brick by brick, rebuilt it in the Botanic Gardens and restored it, as you can see in this image here. So this is the same gardener's cottage which was on Leith Walk, which sat for 200 years away from the gardens it was supposed to be a part of, and it's finally sort of back home, and you can visit it in person if you, again, if you get the chance to visit the Botanics in Edinburgh. Very last thing, and I suppose because I'm from the College of Physicians of Edinburgh, I have to sort of labour our work a little bit before we finish up. Obviously, as I've mentioned, various of our past presidents and fellows, lots of physicians have been involved in Physic Gardens throughout their lives, throughout the lives of those gardens. But I'm now just going to briefly talk about the actual gardens which we physically owned or which were physically part of our building. And this is where we once lived over in the old town at Fountain Close. And this is from, you know, the sort of period of the 1600s, 1700s, when Edinburgh was contained within the Flodden Wall. It was very built up, very tall buildings and very little green space. But the college, luckily enough, had our own little sort of garden area, which was converted into our own very small, petite Physic Garden. And this is where I mentioned right at the start, when you were talking about Tweeddale, that we had a reference to Tweeddale here, because we lived right next to the Marquis of Tweeddale. And we very kindly shared access to our garden with him. We have a formal letter in our collections asking if he may walk in the garden, you know, when he desires. So it shows you how little space there was and how even sort of very prestigious people might not have access to any green spaces. So there's this sort of garden sharing between people going on. And he was very kind about our lovely garden. However, when the writer Daniel Defoe visited Edinburgh and came to see Fountain Close, to see our little Physic Garden, he wrote about it in the Gentleman's Magazine and was rather a lot more rude. So I'm just going to quickly quote to you from this. "We now enter the city properly so called. In almost the first buildings of note on the north side of the street, the Marquis of Tweeddale has a good city house. The place not allowing room for a large garden, adjoining to which are very good buildings, though in narrow alleys. Such as set out in handsome streets would have adorned a very noble city, but here are crowded together. Here the physicians have a hall, and adjoining it to it a very good garden, but I saw no plants of any value." So basically he said, well, it's a nice space for the Marquis of Tweeddale to go for a walk in, but I wouldn't recommend it for medical purposes. But I won't speak to the medical plants that were planted there because we don't know a huge amount about what we actually had. And maybe it was better used for walking than for treating patients. And this is the very last thing I'm going to touch on, which is our Physic Garden today. So this is the door that is the entrance to our college's Physic Garden. And as I mentioned before, the founder of our college, Robert Sibbald, was also the founder of what became the Botanics. And so this little Physic Garden in the middle of our college on Queen Street is sort of a celebration of our historic connection with Physic Gardens and with the Botanic Gardens. So it's very petite because we don't have very much space. And it was set up in 1993, so it doesn't have the longevity of the Botanics, but it's just a little sort of memorial to the work of Robert Sibbald, who was a hugely important man in medical and scientific history, and a sort of nice green space within our college on Queen Street. So again, if you visit us at any point, we would be very happy to show you our Physic Garden. So I finished my bit now. I've rattled through it a bit, but there will be a chance for questions at the end if you have any. But I am now going to hand over, if I can remember, yes, to Ian Milne, who's going to talk about another side of medical botany.
Thank you, Daisy.
Thank
you. I hope you can see my PowerPoint. It should
Yes.
have. Great. Physician flowers. Well, that's the relief. We had a bit of a test earlier, and I wasn't getting that quite right. I'm more comfortable giving people tours and giving talks in person, but as you come from well out with Edinburgh, it's much more convenient that I should be able to speak to you this way. What I'm going to do is talk briefly about some of the printing techniques that were used for the books that are in our current exhibition, and then talk in more detail about two of them. I won't be going on for a huge amount of time, hopefully. Physicians' Flowers was a bit of a victim of the pandemic. This was going to be my final exhibition, and I was really looking forward to putting on a botanical exhibition, because the college has a fantastic collection. However, a lot of the items are either not visually particularly interesting, or they're rather gruesome. But the flower images have a wide-ranging appeal and are very beautiful objects. The other reason I was keen to do it was a lot of the books have been in the collection since the library started 340 years ago in 1682, but they're rarely seen by people out with the college. And indeed, they're really only seen in the college when we would get them out, when we were doing tours or admission ceremonies or things like that. So this was a rare opportunity to see books that are very not put on display at all, really. So the exhibition is on until the start of April. So if you are in Edinburgh, please visit. As you can see, it's free entry. This is a link to what Daisy's been talking about. This is a book that was printed in Amsterdam, and you can see a classical figure using a plant to teach his students. It's rather a wonderful coloured frontispiece. And intriguingly, because Daisy also mentioned the Physic Garden at Holyrood, and this probably won't mean that much for people out with Edinburgh, but in the corner of the image, you can see what looks like tenements with the trees in front, and it's remarkably similar of the view over to Meadowbank from Holyrood Palace. So here's somebody teaching in situ in a garden. The problem with that is that you can't transmit the knowledge very easily. So you need to find some method of getting pictures more widely transmitted, because well-drawn pictures are a great way to identify healing plants and, crucially, to avoid poisonous ones. But unfortunately, hand drawing the many copies needed to share knowledge takes time. The development of printing allowed medicinal plant pictures to be more easily and widely distributed. Here we can see a view of an early printing house. And I think it's still a very hands-on process. And that's one of the really interesting things about a lot of the books that we have in the college's remarkable collection, is that a lot of them are very individual. Even though they're printed books, they tend to have unique features that are just important to that one item. Here we've got a woodcut illustration. This is from 1497. Woodcut printing started to be used in Europe in the 1400s. An artist would draw the plant and then give the drawing to a specialist wood block cutter. And the cutter used sharp tools to carve away parts of a hard, flat wooden block. The carving away is the crucial point. The remaining design, which stands out from the block, is then inked and pressed onto paper in a press. This was actually from a book by Johannes de Cuba, and it's an important early herbal, and it contains lots of illustrations of plants, animals, birds, fishes, and stones. When it was published, people believed that animals and plants were on earth to provide cures for diseases, hence the title Hortus Sanitatis, the Garden of Health. The next illustration is the next stage. You've got your woodcut, it's printed, and then it's hand colored. This is from Mattioli's book on Dioscorides, printed in 1572. It shows holly, and holly was used in fevers and rheumatism, and its berries as an emetic and a purgative. The book by Mattioli was actually a reprint of a book that had been, well, a manuscript that had been around for 1500 years when Mattioli got hold of it. It's the 1st century Greek physician Dioscorides de Materia Medica. This was one of the first scientific books on medicinal plants. And Dioscorides' work remained authoritative for over 1500 years. And as I said, one of the most successful updaters was Mattioli, whose work went into 50 editions. The next step on is engraving. This is by Fabio Colonna, published in Naples in 1592. Engravers use a hardened steel tool to cut a design into the surface of a metal plate. The engraved plate is inked before the surface is wiped clean, only leaving ink in the engraved lines. The plate and a sheet of paper is then put through a high-pressure printing press. The paper picks up the ink left in the engraved lines. This is quite a small book, but it's the first strictly botanical book in which copperplate engravings were used. It's believed that the drawings and the engravings were done by Colonna himself. He expressly stated that he used wild plants as models wherever possible, as cultivation can produce alterations in form. A lawyer by profession, Colonna suffered epilepsy, and it was in his search for a cure that he became interested in medicinal plants. Through a study of Dioscorides, he identified the herb valerian, which he believed cured him. The next step on is to hand color the engravings. This is an engraving of a Chinese rose, which was used to treat cystitis, painful periods, venereal diseases, and as a diuretic and a contraceptive. It's from James Edward Smith's Gleanings of Botany, published in 1791. Smith was a doctor who became one of the most eminent British botanists of his time, publishing many botanical books. He bought the collections of the Swedish botanist Carl Linnaeus, and he founded the Linnaean Society in London. The society became central to the scientific study of botany in the late 18th and early 19th centuries. We now move on to lithography, which was invented in 1798, and it's based on the chemical repulsion of oil and water. Lithography allows printers to capture very small detail and print in color. This illustration is from Curtis's Botanical magazine, which is the world's longest running, continually published botanical periodical, featuring original color illustrations of plants. It was founded in 1787, it's still going, and Kew Garden are responsible for it now. And slightly counterintuitively, I'm finishing with a painting of a plant, because even talented photographers using the 21st century's fantastic cameras can't beat skilled botanical artists when it comes to showing plants clearly and correctly. Paintings can include flowers, buds, stems, and roots. A leaf can be shown from above and below, and you can include details that can only be seen with a microscope. And the plant exhibition at the college is roughly chronological, and we finish off with some paintings that have been loaned to us by graduates of the Royal Botanic Gardens Edinburgh Diploma in Botanical Illustration course. And this is one showing the foxglove digitalis. I'll now move on to talking about a couple of the most wonderful books in the collection, well, at least in my opinion. And the first one is the Hortus Eichstentensis, published in Eichstätt in 1640. This is by Basil Besler. And Basil Besler was a Nuremberg apothecary and botanist who looked after the Bavarian garden of the Archbishop of Eichstätt. In 1600, the Archbishop commissioned Besler to create a work describing all his Eichstätt plants. And Besler worked on the drawings for 16 years. Only 28 color copies survive, and the college has one of them. There were various editions. There was actually an earlier edition of this book, and there are some uncolored ones, and they exist in various forms. You can see ours is bound in one volume. We have a temperature-controlled strongroom in the basement of the building where this lives normally when it's not being exhibited. And we really don't get it out very often, partly because it's enormously heavy. It's very large, and it's a very difficult book to move around. Some of them have been bound in multiple parts, and they would be a lot more usable than the college's copy. There are 374 plates showing more than 1,000 flowers representing 667 species. It's arranged by season, presumably because 1 or 2 chests of fresh specimens were sent weekly during the flowering season from Eichstätt to Nuremberg for illustration. The first edition opened in winter with 7 plates showing 28 plants. Spring was more abundant with 134 plates depicting 454 plants, and summer even more so with 505 plants on 184 plates. The work ended in autumn with 42 plates showing 98 images. The designs are impressive. The dramatic effect is enhanced by the huge proportion of the plates. Here's a few examples. You can get an idea of the extraordinary detail if you look at the blow up here. And again here. Another book that is possibly my favorite in the collection. Some of you may have heard about. It's Elizabeth Blackbull's Herbal, a curious herbal containing 500 cuts of the most useful plants, which are now used in the practice of physic, by Elizabeth Blackbull. And there is a relatively extraordinary story that goes with Elizabeth Blackbull's Herbal. Our edition was published in 1739. Elizabeth Blackbury, her background in Aberdeen is a little bit murky, but at some stage she eloped with her second cousin, possibly, Alexander Blackbull, who was the son of the professor of divinity at Marischal College. Alexander, they eloped to London, where Alexander set up a printing business. This was unwise. Alexander hadn't served an apprenticeship, and the powerful London printers brought an action against him, and Alexander was forced out of business. He was declared bankrupt in 1734 and committed to debtor's prison. So Elizabeth was stuck in London with her husband in prison. Luckily, she learned that various influential doctors, including Sir Hans Sloane, the then president of the College of Physicians of London, wanted to produce a herbal showing the medicinal plants in the Chelsea Physic Garden. And you can still visit the Chelsea Physic Garden close to the Thames, next to the Chelsea pensioners. Elizabeth carefully and skillfully produced accurate drawings of the plants. The drawings were then taken to the imprisoned Alexander, who added botanical nomenclature. And I wonder if you may remember on the first slide, you could see next to the title page, there was a sheet which described the plants and gave their medicinal uses. Now, this was actually engraved rather than being used, being produced with movable type. And I wonder if this was because of Alexander's problems with the printers. But Elizabeth then engraved the illustrations and Alexander's descriptions, as I said, on copper plates. After they were printed, she hand-colored the 500 sheets, who knows how many times. And the work was originally published in weekly parts. The first collected volume appeared in 1737. Both the Royal College of Physicians of London and the London College of Surgeons praised the enterprise, which became a major success, and it restored the Blackbull's finances. Debts cleared. Alexander was released from prison. He'd served 2 years and took up a new career as an agricultural advisor. In 1742, he went to Sweden, where he gained King Frederick's patronage. He was even awarded a royal estate where he could carry out his experiments of agricultural improvements. Unfortunately, Alexander then turned his hand to politics. In the aftermath of the 45 rebellion, there were links between Jacobites and some highly placed individuals in Sweden. Alexander was accused of involvement in a plot to alter the Swedish succession. He was condemned to death for high treason and executed on the 29th of July, 1747. Elizabeth was spared witnessing her husband's death. She was in England, apparently just on the point of joining Alexander. She died 11 years later in 1758 and was buried in the churchyard of Chelsea Old Church. But she produced a really extraordinary book. It is one of the most beautiful in our collection. I'll reach the end by going back and linking with a couple of things that Daisy was talking about. Daisy was talking about John Hope, who started the Leith Walk Physic Garden. Hope was very connected with the College of Physicians, and he was very friendly with the Earl of Bute, who was the first Scottish-born British Prime Minister. And you would have seen Bute's crest on the copy of Besler that I showed you, and here it is again. Bute is in the middle of this slide. And we do have an extraordinary archive in the college with letters going back to 1681. And we have a letter sent by the Earl of Bute to the college, in which he rather embarrasses the college because he's given them this, what would have been in the 18th century, a very valuable gift of very useful botanical books. And he has received no acknowledgement. He writes a delicate letter saying that, you know, sometimes books can go missing because the carrier isn't as careful as he should be. The letter lands on the desk of the then president of the college, who is Sir Stuart Threepland. Now, you can see Threepland is the gentleman at the right-hand side of the slide in tartan. And as he's called Stuart Threepland and he's dressed in tartan, you might guess that he had Jacobite sympathies. And Stuart studied medicine in Edinburgh, graduated in 1742, became a college fellow in 1744. But after the Jacobite rebellion's failure, which he took part in, he had to go into exile in France. But in 1747, there was an amnesty. Threepland returned from exile and built up a thriving medical practice in Edinburgh, and obviously was accepted back into Scottish society and became president of the college. So he's stuck with this problem about how to acknowledge Bute's letter, wondering if they've got his books. And he writes a letter back saying, by particular, and we have a draft of the letter in the archive, to the Earl of Bute, 4th May 1768, by particular desire of the Royal College of Physicians in Edinburgh, I beg leave to trouble your lordship with their most grateful acknowledgements for the elegant and genteel present of books you've been pleased to honour us with. They're both useful and ornamental to our library. However, the college thought it improper to interrupt your lordship's attention from affairs of great moment by intimating the arrival of each volume, which, as excuses go, is not the greatest, particularly as one of the books he gave us was Maria Merrian's book about the plants and insects of Suriname, which has a wonderful frontispiece. This is an extract from it here, and you can see The hand-coloured engraved frontispiece shows Maria looking down at her own book and her favourite fruit, a pineapple. 6 cherubs are helping her to sort and store her specimens. Maria also features in the background collecting butterflies in a cultivated Suriname landscape. This is another hand-coloured engraving. If you visit the exhibition, you'll see more wonderful books, including Woodville's Medical Botany. And this is from Cuba, which I mentioned at the start. It shows the mandrake, whose roots sometimes resemble human figures. And according to legend, a dug-up root will scream, killing all who hear it. It's used as a painkiller and soporific. I mentioned hand-colored engravings, and during the pandemic, I probably shouldn't mention this in front of Daisy. I thought I would color in some of our title pages, so you can. I got a bit bored, but you can see my work on the right-hand side. This, of course, is digital. Well, I hope if you are in Edinburgh, you will visit the exhibition. And we finish by mentioning that about half of all the drugs in clinical use in the world today are based on natural products or their derivatives. Researchers are currently investigating new plant compounds from flowering plants, fungi, and molds. Indeed, molds, which are part of the fungal kingdom, are responsible for 2 of the best known medicines in the world, penicillin and the anti-cholesterol statins. Yew is used as a cancer drug. Galantine, snowdrop, may have potential in Alzheimer's disease, and recent research has shown that capsicum, the ointment from chili peppers, can modify the transmission of paint signals from nerve endings to your brain. Who knows what plant will provide our next breakthrough? Well, thank you very much.